put this here, yeah? Is this okay? All right. A few years ago, I had a unique visitor, a man named Edo, who my father had met alongside in the Bosnian War, who my mother met through my father, and who had stayed with my parents after following them to America. My parents decided to move back to Bosnia, but Edo stayed. And 3 years ago, he decided to pay us a visit in Počtelj. But one thing I remember is that when we had sat down, we were waiting for our drinks to come, and there was a very awkward and uncomfortable silence. And it wasn't until our drinks came that Edo took a sip of his coffee, slammed his hands down on the table, and goes, "I have so much to tell you." And it really got me thinking about how used to kafanas and how dependent on them I've gotten since I've moved from America to Bosnia. Because in America, coffee is seen as a stimulator, a pick-me-up. The Bosnian coffee dates I remember were that, only with other Bosnians. And one of my favorite stories is when my mother tells me how after the wave of Bosnian refugees, Starbucks was the first coffee chain to put tiny wicker tables and wire chairs on the sidewalks next to rushing traffic. With our American friends, we went bowling. Here, coffee is used as a conversation catalyst, with each Bosnian having a list of places off the top of their head, each with their own niche context. One cafe for relationship advice, and another cafe for shop talk. And from what I've noticed, Bosnians are far more inept at picking out physical context in the conversation process, far more than Americans. But what is this culture around coffee, and what does it mean for communication? And that's the actual sociological term for it, coffee culture, the way coffee controls and connects communication. So many things influence it: history, geography, dialect, education, economy. Consider Ethiopia, the birthplace of coffee, where serving coffee is a tradition only for important guests. The youngest female of the household will be the one to first home roast the green beans, brew a potent, bitter coffee, and serve the coffee from the eldest guest to the youngest. She will repeat this process 3 times before the guests need to leave. When the guests do leave, they will stand up and thank her and wish her good fortune on her housekeeping skills and fortune in finding a good, suitable husband. In Italy, on the other hand, the birthplace of coffee culture, we have very strict and traditional norms on what kind of coffee to get at what time. A light, milky coffee, such as a cappuccino or a latte, is most likely to be served with breakfast. However, after the morning meal, the only coffee that a true Italian is supposed to order is a dark shot of espresso café, to be served at a drinkable temperature and to be drunken in at most 3 sips while standing up. We even have Turkish coffee, which is only different to Bosnian coffee to the fact that sugar and spices are placed inside the water as it is brewed, but is normally served with a cup of lukewarm water or a sweet of sorts to cleanse the palate, so the drinker can keep enjoying the potent brew for a longer time. In fact, it were the Ottomans who brought their tradition of coffee culture to former Yugoslavia. As early as the 16th century, kafanas were street-side shops owned by heads or representatives of communities and used to speak politics, to discuss passing crimes and trade laws. The earliest recorded kafana is in modern-day Belgrade, known as Crni Orao, the Black Eagle. Women were not even allowed to step foot in kafanas until the 19th century for fear of being disruptive to the politic process. And if we were to travel back in time to 1914, we could go down Čaršija and find the kafana called Crni Kon, the Black Horse. and see Gavrilo Princip in the back corner fleshing out his assassination plan. If you want a more modern example of coffee culture, then consider an event that BURCH University hosted only a few weeks ago, Career in Coffee with Professor Gorchin, where we associated profound questions and deep advice to an innate understanding of having it over a cup of coffee. But what created the difference of coffee culture in Bosnia and America? Why is there such a connotation of instant or to-go coffee in America, where in Bosnia, coffee is used as a socializer? Out of all the things that I mentioned as an example of what affects coffee culture, the most important one here is history, as namely, America doesn't have enough of it. Keep in mind that America started out as 13 British colonies alongside the East Coast, lowly waged and heavily taxed. It wasn't until December 16, 1773, that a group of American patriots went to Boston Harbor, pirateered 3 British ships, and overturned $1 million, the equivalent of 1.7 million marks worth of compressed tea into the bay. This is known as the Boston Tea Party and the start of the American Revolution. Of course, understandably, after the American Revolution and after America was declared an independent country, trade between the British Empire or any of its colonies and America was non-existent, and there was no other way to get tea. The only other drink in abundance came from Irish settlers, namely whiskey, which was not a good everyday drink for a budding country. Add that to the fashion frenzy of France in the 1810s, where everything from fashion to shopping to cafes became increasingly popular, and we suddenly have an increase in the bulk buying of Brazilian beans. But again, keeping in mind that the original 13 colonies were so heavily taxed, and there was such an important focus on the redistribution of resources, it makes sense that the new America put such a large emphasis on the freedom of speech and open market. Instant coffee became a resource as early as 1864, pre-ground, pre-dried, and sold mainly to farmhands and cowboys working in the West. Instant coffee took its place as a wartime ration before World War I, and after World War II was even used as a political campaign in order to improve circulation in the local economy. The American government decided to have a mandatory coffee break for all companies and employees, just long enough to run out to the nearest coffee shop, grab a coffee to go, and go back. So now we see that there is a large difference between the historical and economic situations between America and Bosnia. But what happens to this conversation outside the coffee shop? After all, coffee culture doesn't end at the store's forefront. It seeps into every part of communication in everyday life. In Bosnia, the context formed a social importance, where coffee remained as a socializer and a catalyst, and where familial bonds quickly became more important than individualized plans. In America, coffee formed an individual importance, so coffee remained as a booster, and things such as career choices, university, marriage, and children are seen as the only way to gain your path towards individual happiness and success. But in America, not to focus on yourself is a deadly sin, where the economy and marketplace is constantly marketing towards the individual, while in Bosnia, not to focus on the group is a grave insult, where štela is as common of a word as help and not as bribery, but also where a 4-year-old child in a smaller neighborhood can feel safe going out after sundown, and they, at 4 years old, will know the names of every single one of their neighbors. Most Americans that come to Bosnia, they write articles or talk about their time, and they'll mention how Bosnians take the time to enjoy the little things in their life, whether it's the iconic watching a sunset, but also walking down the street and stopping to smell homemade food or sweets in this corner shop. And if there's anything that moving from America to Bosnia taught me, is that the best balance of things doesn't lay on either side of an extreme, but somewhere in the middle. So what are the 3 rules for advancement that I think everybody should follow from coffee culture? 1, don't forget where you come from, because where you come from is just as important as where you will go, and it will affect who you are and how you act when you get there. 2, differentiate selfishness and self-care. It is not a sin to put yourself first, as long as that does not put your group behind or put someone else behind you. We need to understand that we are allowed to think of ourselves first. 3, constantly reevaluate yourself. See what is different around you and apply it to yourself and learn from it. A good word for this might be cosmopolitan, but I prefer to use the term beniter, which is the Latin term coming from the Latin word bene, meaning good, and iter, meaning to travel. You could translate beniter to mean one who is well traveled, but I prefer to use the translation one who travels well. And one who travels well is one who keeps the same mindset whether they are going across an ocean or across the street. I'm not saying go to America, although everybody should go somewhere in their life, but a lot of the concepts that I've just mentioned you can see in so many places, in university classes, in extracurriculars, in courses, because these are places people go when they wish to start change, and this is where they realize they need to start it with themselves. While not everyone lives outside the country they were born in, most people are, and all people can be an immigrant and ambassador to change. Maybe one day I'll go back to my hometown, a small little place, Columbia, Missouri, with a population of 125,000 and a total of 17 coffee shops. But this time, I'll be able to stand on the sidewalk and count the tables, and count the dialects that I hear, and enjoy watching these people talking about their days and enjoying this time over a cup of coffee long since cold. Because these are the people that will go back home afterwards with dreams and plans and projects not quite yet reached. And maybe I'll see my friend there. And this time, when he pulls out a chair for me, I'll be the one to sit down, ready to talk for 2 hours about everything and nothing, and that beautiful something in between. Coffee gone cold, but dreams just warming up. Are we done? Yes! Oh, thank God.